I'm going to show you how one buried village rewrote the pyramids. By the final act, you'll see who really built them. The pyramids were not built by slaves. That sounds wrong. You've heard the slave story your whole life. But a 4500-year-old diary names the real workers. And by the end, their payroll will look like your job. Picture the Great Pyramid of Giza. Around 2560 BC, on the edge of the desert. Over 2 million blocks of stone. Some weigh more than a car. Stacked into a mountain taller than a 40-story building. Now picture who built it. You probably see thousands of slaves, whipped, starving, dragging stone under a cruel sun. That image is everywhere. It's in movies, in cartoons, in old paintings. You absorbed it without ever questioning it. But here's the strange part. For a structure this famous, the builders left almost no trace in that story. No slave camp was ever found at Giza. No mass chains. No prison. So where did the slave story even come from? For something we all know, the proof is missing. That gap is where this gets interesting. And if it's wrong, then who lifted the stones? Start with where the myth was born. Around 440 BC, a Greek writer named Herodotus visited Egypt. That's already 2,000 years after the pyramid was built. He wrote that 100,000 men toiled to raise it. Later generations turned men into slaves. You know how a story grows in the retelling. One detail hardens into fact, and a guess from a tourist became history. We trusted a second-hand rumor for 2,000 years. Now move to something stranger. In 1990, a tourist was riding near the pyramids. Her horse stumbled on a hidden mud brick wall. Beneath, it was a tomb, then another, then hundreds. It was a cemetery, for the pyramid workers themselves. This is where Zahi Hawass and Lehner enter. For decades, Lehner excavated the land south of the pyramids. What he found was not a prison. It was a town. Bakeries, breweries, storerooms, sleeping quarters for thousands. A whole city built to feed and house the builders. Bread was baked in vast quantities. Beer was brewed by the gallon. This was an operation feeding a small army. Now move to something ancient and specific. In the workers' dumps, Lehner's team found animal bones. Enormous amounts of them. Cattle, sheep, and goats hauled in from distant farms. One analysis suggested enough meat to feed thousands every day. Slaves are not fed prime beef. What kind of workforce eats like that? And the bones tell more. The skeletons show heavy labor, worn joints, healed fractures. But they also show care. Broken arms set properly, survived injuries. Some workers received medical attention reserved for valued people. What this means for you is simple. These were not disposable bodies. They were treated like they mattered. Here's another clue. Every year, the Nile flooded the farmland. For months, the fields sat underwater. The farmers could not farm. Many scholars believe these idle farmers became the workforce. Building the pyramid may have been a season of national service. Not punishment, participation. Then comes the detail that breaks the myth completely. On the walls, the workers left graffiti. They named their own teams. One gang called themselves the Friends of Khufu. Another, the Drunkards of Menkaure. Slaves don't sign proud nicknames next to a king's. That's the language of people who belonged. But if they weren't slaves, a bigger question opens. Were they paid? Were they free? Did they choose this? For a long time, that was just a theory. Until the ground gave up a piece of paper. Remember the slave story we started with? Here is what actually replaced it. The pyramids were built by skilled, paid, organized Egyptians. Free workers, fed and housed, working in rotating crews. And we don't just guess this anymore. We have their words. In 2013, a French team led by Pierre Tallet was digging at Wadi al-Jarf, an ancient harbor on the Red Sea. There they found the oldest written papyri ever discovered in Egypt. They are about 4,500 years old. They date to the reign of Khufu, the very king of the Great Pyramid. One of them is a logbook. It was written by a man named Merer. Merer was an inspector who led a team of about 40 men. And in his diary, he records his daily work. His crew sailed boats up the Nile. They carried fine white limestone from the quarries at Tura. They delivered it to Giza to case the Great Pyramid. Think about what that means. We can read the actual shipping log of a man who helped build it. His name, his route, his schedule. A real person, doing a real job, 4,500 years ago. Not a slave with no name. A worker who kept records. The papyri even mention rations. The workers were paid in bread, beer, and grain. Their effort was measured, recorded, and rewarded. This is the single most specific proof we have. Not a legend. Not a guess. A 4,500-year-old timesheet. But here's what makes this even stranger. Because the way Mehrer's world was organized, the crews, the rations, the supply lines, it isn't ancient at all. You've seen it before. You may be living inside it right now. You do this too. Every time you clock into a job, you join Mehrer's world. Look closely at how the pyramid was actually run. The workforce was split into named teams. Each team had a leader and a schedule. Supplies were tracked. Food was budgeted. Output was logged. That is a payroll. That is project management. That is a company. What the Egyptians did in 2560 BC, you repeat every work week. Think about your own workplace. The schedules, the shifts, the lunch breaks. The team that grumbles but shows up. Strip away the screens, and it's the same machine. The estimates now suggest around 20,000 to 30,000 workers built the Great Pyramid. In rotating shifts. Not 100,000 slaves. A managed workforce, the size of a small city's company. And here's the part you wouldn't predict. Those gang names. The Friends of Khufu, the Drunkards of Menkaure. Their team names. The same instinct that splits your office into departments, that makes coworkers invent inside jokes and nicknames, was already running on the Giza Plateau. The next time you join a work team and feel that quiet pride, you are echoing a feeling carved into a pyramid. I've saved this one for last because it belongs last. For 4,500 years, we called these people slaves. We erased them. We turned thousands of free human beings into a faceless, suffering crowd. But they had names, friends, teams, pride. They ate together. They got hurt and were healed. They built the greatest thing the world had ever seen. And they wanted you to know they did it. That's why they signed the walls. This was never just a story about stone. It was about being remembered. And for thousands of years, we forgot them anyway. Somewhere in Mehrer's careful handwriting is a kind of immortality. He did get remembered, just 4,500 years late. Tell me, have you ever poured yourself into work no one remembered was yours? The pyramids were not built by slaves. They were built by people who hoped someone, someday, would say their names.